Can you use GVT with an athlete when the goal is fat loss? So here I'm assuming that this person with the question GVT, they meant German body comp, so GBC, because GVT is German volume training, which is more known for hypertrophy than for a fat loss method. So assuming we're talking about GBC, it's not my favorite methods to use with athlete, even when the goal is fat loss. I much prefer using standard strength training protocols and use nutrition to get fat loss results. But if you were to use GBC for fat loss with an athlete, it would have to be in the early preparation phases, as far away as possible to the competitive season. Because it's just like, although yes, it's metabolically efficient to improve like the fat loss aspect of your strength and conditioning, the problem is it's also very hard to build significant amount of strength with more advanced level athletes. And knowing that strength has to be the main culprit you're going to improve in the off season, you cannot afford to detract too much from strength. Now, if you have somebody who's really advanced, who's already very strong to start with, but would benefit from higher improvement in conditioning and fat loss, then you could start the off season with a GBC right away and take that out of the equation. Now, if the question was really meant to talk about German volume training for fat loss, so again, German volume training is a method that was devised to improve hypertrophy, where you're doing 10 sets of 10 with 60% of your 1RM, and then you're tapping into the exact same motor units over and over and over and over again, which will lead to a great stimulus for hypertrophy. Now, the problem is, the reality is German volume training is more of a beginner method. It's way more efficient with the 0 to 1 year and a half of training than for the advanced athlete or a advanced lifter. It's just not a very effective method for that. And one of the reasons for it is because the intensity used with German volume training is too low. At 60%, it's too low of an intensity to really trigger a response that will benefit the high-level athlete. Why is it good for beginners? One, because again, the intensity is on the lower end at 60%, but it's also very effective for movement rehearsal. So if you want to improve your squatting technique as an early trainee, doing 10 sets of 10 at 60%, now not only will it help build the hypertrophy, which will be the base or the springboard, if you want, for further development of strength, but it will allow you to rehearse that motor pattern over and over and over again to make your squat more proficient on a technique perspective. So I like it for that reason. But to me, it's not a method you should use with high-level trainees or athletes, as intensity is too low and the carryover just won't be there with that type of trainee. So do I also use percentage-based training prescription with the B series as well, or I just use it with the A series? So again, when it comes to percentages, I only use percentages as a guide to help me start a new training phase. And then you need to readjust depending on the individual, conditioning, work capacity, and on and on. But the reality is, because the A series, we're focusing more on multi-joint compound movements, where we're going more for quality work, the intensity percentages allow me to better decide which loading I'm going to use for that specific athlete. But the problem is, once you move on to the B series with these assistance exercise, the percentage, although it can still be used as a guide, it becomes a little bit less relevant, because now you have the accumulated fatigue of your A series, and you also have like more overall fatigue from the training session. So although you might be accurate percentage wise for set number 1, The problem is like the higher level of fatigue you have during that session, some trainees don't have the same recovery response or the same conditioning level, which means that their drop off from set to set might be greater in the B series than they would be in the A series. And remember that the B series, the goal at this point is to use the repeated effort method where you're trying to go to failure. Okay, so if you're going to failure on each and every set, then it becomes even more taxing, which means that the drop off from set to set, on top of being fatigued from the primary exercises, the drop off at this point can be even bigger. So, the percentages for the B series, it's really just a rough guideline. But the goal is the rep is king. At the end of the day, the rep is always king. So if you're prescribing 10 reps on the B series and you want to be very precise and use a percentage, but at this point in time, because of this 25 minutes spent on the A series, you cannot do your 10 reps at 74% of your 1RM, well then forget about the percentage. Use whatever weight that the athlete can perform 10 reps with on that first set. Now, because we're training to failure with the B series, if there is a slight rep drop off from set 1 to 2 to 3, for example, it's okay, because you're training to failure. But you cannot be too, you have to open your mind a little bit with the percentages with the B series. It's not that important. The rep is king. You're going for the rep and you're trying to train to failure. Unlike, again, the A series, you're using the percentages as a guide. You're going for quality. You don't want to miss reps. You want to keep proper rehearsal of quality work. So to me, the percentages have way more impact on the A series than they would in the B or even in the C series. So in the C series, how do I choose the number of sets or time under tension for exercises like planks and hollow holds and stuff like that? Well, first of all, just to be clear, these are not exercises I really use. I rarely use these type of movement, but if I were to use it, what I like to do is whatever your time under tension goal is. So let's say you're shooting for 60 seconds of time under tension. I much prefer doing multiple shorter isometric contractions of high quality, repeated multiple time, kind of like in a cluster fashion if you want. So for example, you could do like 8 or 10 second holds with very perfect, high quality, highly stable, braced technique. Then you do 10 seconds, short rest, 10 seconds, short rest, 10 seconds, short rest, and you do that 5 or 6 times to reach your 60-second target. So I think this is better than to try to go like for a straight one shot 60 seconds, simply because what's going to happen is after a certain point you're going to start seeing technique and you're going to become destabilized, and now you're just training a bad motor pattern. Now, if you have athletes in sports that eventually demands to have an isometric contraction of that duration, then you have to build it up to that point. So all you can do is like you go from your 10 seconds old, and then you progress to maybe like a 15 to a 20 to a 25, and then you take little breaks and you go again for another 20 and 25. So at this point, you might only need 2 or 3 sets to do your 60 seconds, but you progress it that way. If you do that, you're gonna find your athlete improve on the qualitative end of the spectrum much faster than if you're trying to go at 60 seconds every time, but then collapses at 12 seconds on the first workout, but you still haven't maintained position, although it's a broken position. The problem now is your learning curve to get to a perfectly done 60 seconds will be much longer in my experience. So using these intra-set breaks in between shorter isometric contraction leads to better results. Now, in terms of choosing the amount of sets, the C series, to be honest, the vast majority of the time it's basically a 3-set prescription. because 3 sets for that C series kind of puts you in the right time frame of 10 to 12 minutes spent on that C series, where I don't really want to spend that much more time training the C series, considering they're most of the time remedial single joint type exercises. But it could, if you have like higher volume in the A and B series, you might want to have as low as 2 sets, or if you have lower volumes in the A's and the B's, you could push your C series to 4. But again, the majority of the time, I'm pretty much sticking to 3, basically as a standard. Is the way the conditioning workouts are presented in the conditioning guide that we have on our site the same type of conditioning I do with professional athletes? The answer is yes, in the sense that with athletes, I love to use modified strongman circuits to work on the conditioning aspect of the athlete. But the big difference is with athlete, I will work through all of the energy systems during the off season. So I might start the earlier stage of the off season with aerobic training. Then as we're progressing through the off season, I'll start working the entire spectrum of the anaerobic system. So I'll start with anaerobic alactic power, anaerobic alactic capacity, and then anaerobic lactic power, and I'll finish with anaerobic lactic capacity. So this is how I'll progress the training with these athletes, but I will still use those modified strongman circuits that we have in the conditioning guide, where we're working on like lifting type exercises, carrying type movements, sled, like dragging or sled pushing, and some of these animal walks. I love using this with athletes. But obviously the structure of the circuit will vary a little bit depending on which energy system you're working. But so unlike the conditioning guide, where it's a little bit more general population oriented, where we're focusing more on the anaerobic lactic, aerobic power energy systems, simply because these two will have a greater general impact on cardiovascular health and fat loss than would like anaerobic alactic power. You know, like this is way more specific to athletic development and might not be as relevant for the general population. So I hope this answers the question with the conditioning.